a wealthy entrepreneur found murdered in his waterfront home.
He was laying face down with his hands kind of tucked up under his pillows.
The entire house had been ransacked.
It didn't appear there was any struggle. It didn't look like he saw it coming.
As leads go cold, investigators turn to the victim's loved ones for answers.
Everybody loved Dad. Nobody hated Dad. There were so many feelings. I didn't even believe it.
But the investigation reveals a family man who lived a bachelor's lifestyle.
He enjoyed his life, he enjoyed partying.
It looked as if he had engaged with somebody to essentially set up a date.
Those messages were very clearly talking about money.
And when detectives zero in on a suspect, it leads to a desperate manhunt that will take them over 3,000 miles away.
She liked shiny things. She liked driving around in a Mercedes.
I think it was premeditated, 100%.
I just kept telling her your best bet is to turn yourself in, because if you're running from something, it's just going to make it so much worse.
March 3rd, 2021, Clackamas County, Oregon. At 11:28 a.m., a 911 call is made from an upscale home on the Willamette River.
How can I help you?
I came over to my boss's house and I found him and he's dead.
Okay. Is he cold to the touch or stiff?
I didn't touch him, but he's in a pool of blood.
The caller, Tony Morrell, says he became concerned for 62-year-old Jimmy Pearson after not hearing from him for several days.
Mr. Merrill was not only his friend, but he also worked for him. He found Mr. Pearson naked, and he had blood all pooling all around his head. As soon as he saw the blood, he got scared, exited the residence, and then called 911.
This call originally was dispatched to Deputy Fredrickson. He's one of our patrol deputies. He responded to the scene. It was a very nice home in a very nice neighborhood. The residence's driveways are gated, so you have to have a code to get into the driveway of the residence. It's a very nice home. It's very large.
Deputy Fredrickson enters the master bedroom, where he finds an unresponsive male victim lying on the bed.
He was laying face down with his hands kind of up over his head, tucked up under his pillows. Deputy Fredrickson could see the blood around his head area on the bed.
A swift search of the bedroom confirms the victim is the owner of the house, Jimmy Pearson.
Deputy Fredrickson did find a wallet on the nightstand, which had an ID card in it, and the ID card appeared to match the deceased person on the bed. Deputy Fredrickson moved one of the pillows to see if there was any firearm. Because the amount of blood, I think he was guessing that it may have been a gunshot wound.
He couldn't determine where the blood was coming from, and he didn't know if it was self-inflicted.
After a preliminary search of the scene, no weapon is located. However, there are signs of what looks like a break-in.
The entire house had been ransacked, drawers opened, things obviously missing, like someone had gone through just about every room and looked through everything.
Homicide detectives quickly arrive, accompanied by the medical examiner.
One of the things we noticed when we walked into his bedroom is that there was a really pungent smell of decomposition, so we knew he had been dead for several days.
As they were examining the body, they did find what appeared to be a bullet wound to the back of the deceased's head.
Until the medical examiner could conduct their pathology exam, we weren't going to be able to 100% say that he died of a homicide. But we were treating it as a homicide. People, when they commit suicide, don't typically shoot themselves in the back of the head.
There were no weapons. There were a lot of unknowns. So trying to find out when something occurred is one of our first steps. reaching out to family, friends, anybody that can give us an indication of where they've been, what they've been doing, and who they've been spending time with.
Jimmy Pearson was born August 19, 1957, in Dearborn, Michigan. He was one of 4 siblings, and their home life was anything but perfect.
His dad was Al Pearson. He played professional hockey for the Detroit Red Wings. However, he was an alcoholic, so that put a damper on his mom and his relationship. So his mother ended up divorcing his dad when he was very young.
Faced with raising the children on her own, Jimmy's mother moved them to Oregon in search of a fresh start.
She had 4 kids, so she spent a lot of hours at work, and they pretty much had to fend for themselves.
He saw his mom working all the time, so he thought he could help out. He, at a young age, would be out mowing lawns, doing whatever he could to provide, to bring in money.
By his early 20s, Jimmy was a hard-working, ambitious young man ready to start a family of his own.
I met Jimmy in the summer that I turned 18, and I met him at a houseboat. My sister was dating somebody who was a good friend of Jimmy's. After we started dating, he had opened up Hawkeye Trading Post, buy, sell, trade. That was his first little foot in the door to, being in the pawn shop business.
Jimmy and Sandra married in 1987 and had 2 children together. But his dedication to work put a strain on the relationship.
Jimmy was a good father when he was around because he worked a lot. Like, he would leave in the morning and sometimes not come back until 1 or 2 in the morning. There's not one thing that led to the divorce. It was a lot of different things. It was a mutual agreement that it was better for us to split. However, when we got divorced, we still were friends.
Jimmy lived with his family for a few years until one of his business ventures got him into trouble with the law in 1992.
The DEA came out to our door like at 6 in the morning. They toted Jimmy out of there within the first half hour. They had a warrant for his arrest for manufacturing and growing marijuana.
Jimmy was convicted on drug charges and spent 3 years in prison. When he got out, Jimmy was anxious to reunite with his children and rebuild his pawn business.
He got a deal at a place out in Gladstone, a property. We named it A1 Hawk.
A1 Hawk is a state licensed pawn shop, and we buy and sell goods and also do 90-day collateral loans. So from open to close, we're buying inventory off of customers or we're selling inventory to customers.
As soon as his daughters could see over the counter, they came to work with him.
We would ask him for money, and he would say, well, how many hours have you worked? When I first started, I was very shy and I was timid, and I was scared to go out on the sales floor. I'd ask my dad a question and in fear, like, Dad, what do I say? He's like, just go in there and tell everybody that there's a new sheriff in town, and act like you own the joint.
The business was a success, and Jimmy expanded to 3 locations. By 2021, Jimmy used the considerable wealth he'd earned to spoil his growing family as his daughters had started families of their own.
He didn't flaunt wealth. He didn't come off pretentious. He definitely used his money for fun. He had 2 houses. One was a floating home, one was just on the bank there, and I remember regularly working on that house and just being awestruck, like, how do you attain these properties?
He seemed like he was happy. Jimmy was a selfless person. He wanted it to be known that A1 Hawk wasn't like other pawn shops and to break the stigma behind most standard corporate pawn shops.
But this doting grandfather and entrepreneur has been found dead inside his sprawling riverfront mansion, and investigators are trying to determine why.
There was no firearm located anywhere. There was no shell casing located anywhere. So that led us to believe that, well, one, he couldn't have killed himself.
They did find 2 drink cups in the bedroom that, most people don't drink out of 2 different glasses of the same type of drink. So it would indicate that there was a second person there. One of the detectives went into the bathroom and found some prescriptions with the name Talia McDaniel.
He had his underwear and his socks on the floor, and I think he had his shirt draped over at the edge of the bed, so it appeared as though he had disrobed and gotten into bed.
It was very likely that the person that killed him was someone that was familiar to him. And it didn't appear there was any struggle. It didn't look like Mr. Pearson saw it coming.
Coming up, an old flame becomes a person of interest.
There was this falling out where money and possessions were taken.
And detectives access a crucial piece of evidence.
As we were looking through the ring footage on Mr. Pearson's phone, we found a female getting out of the vehicle and coming to the front door.
After Oregon detectives search 63-year-old Jimmy Pearson's ransacked bedroom, they suspect he was likely robbed and murdered in his own home.
We were aware that he had owned A1 Hawk pawn locations, and so the belief that because he was the owner of these locations that he would potentially have jewelry or cash on hand.
But it surely looked like somebody had gone through a lot of Mr. Pearson's possessions. When we noticed that he had the ring camera outside the front, we knew that it was likely going to capture whoever killed him. If they came in through the front door, we'd be able to see who did it and at what time the homicide occurred. We needed to gain access to Mr. Pearson's cell phone to gain access to the cameras. The issue was that the phone had a pass lock, so we couldn't get into the phone. So that was a little bit of a challenge.
During the search, 3 of Jimmy's associates have gathered in the driveway.
Mr. Merrill told us that after calling 911, he then called Mr. Pearson's attorney, his paralegal. They both came to the scene.
Detectives step outside to speak with them, starting with Tony.
He indicated that he had known Mr. Pearson for well over 20 years.
Mr. Merrill told investigators that the last time he had saw Mr. Pearson was they had gone to a casino.
They had spent some time up there gambling, eating, and in the early morning hours on February 27th, Mr. Merrill left Mr. Pearson at the casino. He said that was the last time that he had communicated with Mr. Pearson.
On March 3rd, he found it odd that he still had not heard from Mr. Pearson, and actually nobody had heard from him in a couple days. So Mr. Merrill decided he wanted to go inside and check to see if Mr. Pearson was okay.
He said he had access to the garage code. He noticed that the dog food dish was empty, or water bowl was empty. Took care of the dog, fed, water, took it out potty, and then he went to Mr. Pearson's room.
After Tony finishes detailing the events leading up to finding his deceased friend, detectives turn to Jimmy's attorney.
I was asking him a myriad of questions about Mr. Pearson's past and about who would want to harm him. Although he didn't try to throw shade, he indicated that there was a bit of a falling out between Mr. Pearson and his daughters over Mr. Pearson's personal life.
And he had known Mr. Pearson for a long time. They had become friends. He was now his wills and estates lawyer and had written a will for him recently in which he had essentially disinherited his 2 daughters.
The attorney says Jimmy decided to leave his fortune to himself and another friend rather than family.
He handed me his amended will that had just happened within a couple months prior to that, which to me was a little odd. Although it was suspicious how we were introduced, their cooperation led us to believe that his attorney didn't have anything to do with it. Anything that we needed or requested, they were quick to help us with. We asked her, because she knew a lot of Mr. Pearson's affairs, do you know what Mr. Pearson's passcode is? And at first she stated no, but they said, I might be able to locate it. She said one of the people that had access to Mr. Pearson's house was Mr. Pearson's housekeeper, and would come every Monday. Since it was Wednesday at the time, we knew that Monday had just happened.
Investigators place a call to the housekeeper, hoping she might have seen something.
She had been there between the hours of 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. She said she entered the residence through the front door. She has the key Mr. Pearson provided her. She heard loud music coming from the direction of Mr. Pearson's room. She went to go check on Mr. Pearson, opened the door and saw his feet. Thought, oh, he's asleep, I don't want to bother him. So she's the one that actually shut the door, and she proceeded to clean the residence. I asked her, well, while you were there, did anything look odd or out of place or unusual? And the first thing she told me was, hey, you know what? When I was folding clothes, I noticed that there was some women's clothing that I was folding.
Mr. Pearson's housekeeper says it used to be a common occurrence, back when he was dating a woman named Tylea McDaniel.
He had a prior relationship with her, and when Tylea was living with Mr. Pearson, it was very common to see her clothing amongst Mr. Pearson's in the dryer. But that had been about a year prior.
To detectives, the name sounds familiar.
They had found prescription bottles that had belonged to a woman named Tylea McDaniel.
Detectives now aim to track down Ms. McDaniel to determine if she had a motive to harm Jimmy Pearson.
Obviously, that was a name that popped into our periphery as potentially being involved in this.
So when we looked up Mr. Pearson's name, we did find a report where he had claims that he'd been the victim of a burglary. He had listed Tylea McDaniel as stealing from him, and we started to believe that that may be who we needed to find.
The day after Jimmy Pearson was found dead, investigators interview his daughters, Sarah and Tanya Pearson.
They said they believed that he was murdered. And that was... can't even say the feeling. There were so many feelings. I didn't even believe it.
I asked them questions about, hey, tell me about your dad, tell me about your dad's dealings, who he associated with.
Everybody loved Dad. Nobody hated Dad.
Mr. Pearson's daughter's interview was enlightening. They explained why the fallout with their father, and a lot of it had to do with the people he was keeping company with. They didn't like the females that he was around. They described as their feelings were they were potentially escorts.
The only person that came to my mind was Tylea. We started dating a young woman, and I believe she was around 20 years old. We would ask, how did you guys meet? She said it was like in the movie. We were at a grocery store, our carts hit, and then he got my number. She didn't have a job, didn't have a car, didn't have a driver's license. She had nothing. Whether she was nice, great, she's nice. But you're gonna invite this person into your home? Into your business?
Their concern was that she was a bad influence on Mr. Pearson, and that kind of wasn't the type of grandfather that they wanted their children to be around.
As a result, Sarah quit working at the pawn shop, and her suspicions about Tylea grew.
I found out about a month later that my dad thought she took off with a whole bunch of cash and valuables at his house.
There was a report of a theft from this house about a year ago. That case was reported, but no charges were ever filed.
After the robbery, Jimmy broke off the relationship, but the rift between him and his daughters continued to grow.
It had to do with Jimmy feeling like they were trying to take over his life and tell him what to do. He enjoyed his life, he enjoyed partying, and wasn't going to listen to his daughters trying to convince him otherwise.
Despite their problems, Sarah and Tanya tell detectives they were unaware their father had written them out of his will.
They said that we would be getting a call from his lawyer and they would be reading his testimony. When it rains, it pours. And there were so many questions, but my only question was, what happened to my dad?
That day, the medical examiner conducts an autopsy that will answer their question.
It was determined that Mr. Pearson was shot once in the back of the head.
A bullet was removed, and it was identified as a .38 Special Slug.
Now that Jimmy's cause of death is confirmed, investigators are eager to track down the person who pulled the trigger.
This paralegal, she contacted us, provided us the passcode, and when we entered it, thankfully it unlocked his phone. We were able to gain access to Mr. Pearson's text messages and also the Ring camera app.
But none of the messages are from Tylea.
The last read message was from Paris Royal Natasha.
It looked as if he had engaged with somebody to essentially set up a date for someone to come to his house. There was an exchange of messages of, are you here? Or, how far out are you, essentially?
Previous messages spell out the nature of the relationship.
Those messages were very clearly talking about money and them getting together and exchanging money for the time they spent together, which led us to believe that he was paying for her services as an escort. As we were looking through the Ring footage, we found a vehicle arriving at his house and a female getting out of the vehicle and coming to the front door.
Investigators are uncertain who the woman arriving is, but one thing is clear. She is not Tylea McDaniel.
They're two different sized people. They look very different, and it was clear that that was not who we were looking at. Miss McDaniel was no longer really on our radar.
Paris Royal Nistasha, that's not a typical name that we tend to hear. So we had a feeling that that was likely not a real name. So one of the things that we did was we did a search, a law enforcement search of the phone number itself.
We were able to associate that phone number with a Nistasha Rose Tate.
We utilized her driver's license photo, which we were able to use to compare to the person we saw in the Ring camera video.
She was wearing like a dark colored sweatshirt and jeans and was carrying a bag with her. When she went to the door, Mr. Pearson greeted her and then they went inside.
Two hours later, around 2:42 a.m., the footage shows Nistasha leaving the home.
She comes back out and has the same red duffel bag in her hand, and it appears to be extremely full and heavy. In her right hand, it looks like she has maybe some reusable shopping bags or something else, not items that she had originally shown up with, but things that came from inside the home.
She makes several trips of carrying bags and boxes to her vehicle, put things in the vehicle.
It appeared she was wearing gloves, which was odd.
It was very clear that by the condition in which she found the house, how it looked like it had been ransacked, that Nistasha was looking for any valuable she could to sell.
This appears suspicious given the larger context of finding Mr. Pearson deceased. At that point, we're attempting to develop as much information about her as possible. Who is she? Are there any law enforcement contacts in the area with her?
A search of police records results in a hit on Nistasha's name.
She had been involved in a traffic stop 12 minutes after leaving Mr. Pearson's home.
The officer noted that there was a purse that was open on the front passenger seat of Nistasha's car, and that there was a revolver handgun that was sitting in plain view.
She explained she was in possession of the gun because she took it from a friend, and that's not legal to transfer a firearm. The firearm was seized and placed into evidence by Milwaukee police.
During the traffic stop, there was no reason to detain her, but to investigators, the implications are clear.
A bullet was found in Mr. Pearson's head. It was removed and it was identified as a .38 special slug. And knowing that Officer Sanchez had seized a .38 caliber revolver from Nistasha the prior night, that immediately led me to believe that that was likely a murder weapon.
Now, the suspect has about a 2-day lead on law enforcement, so they need to make up 2 days very quickly, because the longer this goes on, the more difficult it is going to be able to find her.
Less than 48 hours into their investigation, homicide detectives have landed on a suspect in the murder of Jimmy Pearson, an apparent escort named Nistasha Tate. They send the evidence gathered so far for forensic testing.
We submitted the jacketed bullet that was recovered from Mr. Pearson's head. We submitted the firearm.
Police also obtain an arrest warrant for Nistasha, but they quickly realize she knows how to move under the radar.
The phone numbers that we had previously for her, we knew were no longer good. She was no longer using. And she worked as an exotic dancer at a couple different nightclubs, gentlemen's clubs. So we had detectives go to those different locations to see if we could find her vehicle. Unfortunately, her vehicle was not found at any of those places. So that became the primary focus of this investigation, is where is she at?
Social media being such a large part of pretty much everybody's lives these days, they were able to find not only her escort page, but her private social media page.
Nistasha's personal account indicates family members are also looking for her.
One of the messages was left by her grandmother that said something similar to, "What the heck, we were all very worried about you."
When investigators reach out to the grandmother, she puts them in touch with Nistasha's mother.
They learn that Miss Tate's mother is Teresa Tate, and that she would be the person who would know where Nistasha Tate is if anybody knew.
When investigators went and spoke to Teresa Tate, she painted a pretty sad story of, what Nistasha's life had been. Had a pretty rough upbringing, couldn't read, couldn't write, had been introduced to prostitution at a fairly young age by a friend who she had kind of grown up with, who was a few years older.
She was very honest and upfront about, my daughter is associated with bad people. She's had multiple pimps. She has prostituted herself throughout the country.
She'd been trying to help her really get out of this world for a long period of time, but because Nistasha did not want that help, their communication had broken down.
Teresa said that Nistasha would only tell her very little about where she was. She would never tell her anything specific.
She said she's hidden in the past and laid low, but not really to this extent. Nistasha had spent time in Los Angeles, Minnesota, New York, Florida, Nevada. So really, she could have been anywhere.
When I left my business card and my phone number, and I told her, hey, if her daughter reached out to her, to let me know so that we can try to follow up. And she told us she would.
To aid in their search, detectives enlist the U.S. Marshals Service. They also file subpoenas for Nistasha's social media accounts.
When those records were received, they were also very enlightening.
She stated that she was looking for a gun from somebody. Another one was like almost an invitation to another person, like, hey, can you come join me to do this lick?
In the day before and even the day of Mr. Pearson's death and the time that she was at his house, she was reaching out to multiple people on Facebook talking about a big lick, kind of a big score.
And looking at Nistasha's social media, she liked shiny things. She liked driving around in a Mercedes. She liked to have possessions. It led us to believe that primary motivator for what Nistasha did, it was greed, it was money.
The picture is becoming much more crystal clear that this was a planned event, that this wasn't something that she went there and it was a crime of passion. She intended to do this, and that she was setting herself up to do this to Mr. Pearson.
Coming up, detectives get a tip on Nistasha's location.
Did she say where she was headed?
North Carolina.
And Nistasha's mother makes a confession.
I just kept telling her your best bet is to get your taken care of and turn yourself in.
The hunt for Nistasha Tate continues for a month with no sign of Jimmy Pearson's suspected killer. But on April 7th, 2021, investigators finally get a lead.
They put out this notice to all law enforcement they were looking for this Mercedes. And turns out that Mercedes ends up getting towed in Portland.
They made a call to the impound and said, do not release this vehicle to anybody. We're going to come down and get it.
That's when we were told that someone else had arrived and was trying to get the vehicle released to them. Turns out it was a friend of Nistasha Tate's, and the tow company asked her to stick around, and detectives wanted to talk to her.
It turned out to be a woman named Monique.
Monique claims she bought the car from Nistasha a month prior.
She said she was finna leave town and she sold my car, and I said, I'll take it.
I stated, okay, do you know where Nistasha is now? And she stated that she didn't know where she was, but she and her boyfriend had driven Nistasha to a bus stop on March 11th. Did she say where she was headed?
North Carolina.
But according to Monique, Nistasha had an unexpected change of plans.
She did call me a couple days after she left, and she was in Florida. She was being really weird, and I kept saying, what's wrong? Like, what did you do? She's like, I can't tell you. I just gotta get away. I just gotta get away.
Detectives asked if there was any way that we could get a hold of her to try to track her down. Monique said that there really wasn't any clear way to get a hold of her because her number was changing and she was communicating on a Wi-Fi only phone. Learning that Nistasha Tate was now potentially in Florida definitely added some complexity to the investigation. We couldn't be further away in Oregon from Florida.
2 days later, as detectives work with Florida police to locate Nistasha, her mother calls to request a meeting.
She didn't want us to meet at her residence. She said she didn't want her neighbors to see her talking to the police, so we met her in some parking lot at a shopping center. She informed us that she had been communicating periodically with her daughter, Nistasha, even though she told us she hadn't been hearing from her.
Teresa explains that she's been trying to convince her daughter to turn herself in.
I just kept telling her your best bet is to get your taken care of and turn yourself in, whatever it is. Because if you're running from something, it's just going to make it so much worse.
Hoping to pin down a location, detectives ask Teresa to make contact with Nistasha.
I'd be fine with that because that's the only way we're going to get her, and she needs to be God at this point. As much as it just feels so against the grain, I know it's the right thing to do for her anyway.
We left, and then a short time after we parted the company, she contacts Deputy Sanders, who's on the U.S. Marshals Task Force, and tells her, hey, FYI, she contacted me on the phone. So then we knew that that was a good number that we could use to try to track her.
Once they get that phone number, and they do what's called a trap and trace, and determined that she was in a bus stop not that far from the Tampa Bay Police Department. So then the Tampa Bay police officer went down there and went to the bus stop, and she stands out a little bit. She's got an unusual look to her and some tattoo on her face that's somewhat recognizable.
Nistasha is carrying the same sweatshirt detectives saw her sporting in the footage from Jimmy's doorbell camera.
It was a very distinct hoodie with some words on it, bougie or something along that line. The detectives got to keep an open mind to the possibility of a fight or a struggle.
They covertly took a picture of her in the area and sent it to detectives.
They sent to me, hey, is this her? And I was able to positively identify, yeah, that was her. At that point, I told them, yeah, that's her.
Once they confirmed that that was her, she was, cooperative, they then took her into custody.
I was called, told she's in custody, and travel arrangements were made for myself and my partner, Detective Michael Zacher, to fly out to Tampa, Florida immediately.
We went to an interview room and Nistasha was brought to us.
I would like a court-appointed lawyer.
I just want you to be aware that once we leave, that's basically your opportunity to tell us what happened, until trial happens.
Yeah, I'd still like an attorney.
Nistasha is charged with first-degree robbery and second-degree murder. While she's being extradited back to Oregon, Jimmy's family learns of the arrest.
We were so excited. Like, it was like we won the lottery.
They did give us the name, and then we, started looking it up because we'd never seen her before. She had 2 tattoos on her forehead.
There's no way. Dad hated tattoos. Dad did not associate with those kind of people, and there's just no way. We didn't believe it.
After a month-long investigation, 23-year-old Nistasha Tate has been charged for the murder of Jimmy Pearson. As prosecutors prepare the case for trial, the evidence against her continues to grow.
All of the evidence from the ballistics are all indicating the gun that was in her car 12 minutes after she left the house is the gun that caused his death.
Prosecutors believe the shooting was part of a premeditated plan.
She, as the evidence would indicate, was influenced and manipulated and trafficked in her past. And this was her one opportunity to turn things around and take control on her own. But she needed money to do that.
But as the court date approaches, Nistasha decides to make a deal instead of going before a jury.
If we were to go to trial, we might not be able to prove the first-degree murder. Since we don't have any eyewitnesses as to what actually happened in there, it's all circumstantial evidence. We came to agreement that she would plead to second-degree murder, which is also a true life sentence, but with consideration of parole after 25 years.
We said that we would be fine with doing that plea if she would give us a statement as to what happened and how it happened and why it happened.
In December 2021, Nistasha gives Jimmy's family what they asked for.
Her statement was that she had been up a few nights on a binger, drinking and doing drugs, and that when she had gotten over there, they had a drink, and then they had went to the room and had a drink in there, and then she was going to give him a back massage, and she reached down into her bag and pulled out a gun, and he moved and it went off. And then she panicked and didn't know what to do.
She claims that it was an accident, yet she robbed him still and fled. If it was truly an accident, you probably would have made different choices.
She was looking for a gun. It's not self-defense. It's not an accident. It's something that was motivated by money and greed.
I don't believe it was even the truth of actually how things went down. I think it was premeditated, 100%.
She took away my dad. She took away my best friend, the one that I looked up to, my kids' grandfather that they'll never get to know. She took away our future with him. And yeah, it's horrible. Something that you can't get back. Sometimes I think about setting up a time to go and see her in prison and ask her for myself face to face. But then I go back and don't want to give her that time of day. Maybe someday I will.
Jim should be remembered as someone to aspire to on so many levels. As a father figure, as an entrepreneur, a business owner, there are a lot of outstanding qualities one would aspire to.
Jimmy was a truly compassionate and kind soul and giving. His daughters that have now taken over A1 Hawk, they completely live by his life with everything. The businesses ran the same exact way that Jim ran it, even listening to the same radio station for the past 8 years.
My sister and I having sticking together, and as much as we, it's hard, especially both being hurt, that we just have to stick together. Dad is still teaching us from up above. We think about all of the good memories that we had with our dad. He will never be forgotten. I don't think that there's an hour that goes by that he doesn't cross my mind.
Who was requesting a welfare check on his elderly in-laws. His voice trembled with anxiety as he tried to explain the situation to the operator. He explained that his family had gathered outside the apartment complex where Long and Hong lived. They had knocked on the door, but there was no response. His teenage son had tried to peer through the windows and noticed that one of them was slightly open, and things inside appeared to be in disarray. Too terrified to enter the residence themselves, the family waited outside, praying that everything would be all right. Officer Weller, a dedicated officer with 14 years of service on the force, was the first to arrive on the scene. He was accustomed to the usual routine of welfare checks. But as he pulled up to the apartment complex, he immediately sensed that something was different. It was unusually early in the morning for such a request, and seeing an entire family gathered outside in the driveway, visibly shaken and pale with worry, made his instincts kick in. With his flashlight in hand, Officer Weller entered the quiet apartment. The silence inside was heavy, almost suffocating. As he moved through the rooms, he noticed the classic signs of a break-in. The living room was in complete disarray. Compact discs were scattered across the floor, and furniture was overturned as if someone had been desperately searching for valuables. He called out, his voice echoing off the walls, but there was no answer. He checked the kitchen, the bathroom, and then walked into the bedroom. At first glance, the bedroom appeared empty. Officer Weller turned around, preparing to leave the room and report back to the family, thinking perhaps the elderly couple had simply gone out for an early morning walk. But just as he turned toward the door, his flashlight beam caught something unusual. Next to a very small closet door, there were distinct dark hand smudges on the wall. A sudden, chilling sensation washed over him. Every instinct honed over his 14 years of duty told him to proceed with caution. He hesitated for a brief moment, breathing in the quiet air, before reaching out and opening the closet door. Inside, the devastating reality of a terrible crime was revealed. Long Nguyen and Hong Lee were found bound with heavy duct tape, hidden away in the dark space. There was no breath left in them, and the sheer brutality of the scene left the seasoned officer in a state of absolute shock. Officer Weller walked out of the bedroom into the middle of the living room, unable to speak or even use his radio for several long seconds. When he finally found his voice, he contacted his dispatchers to request a supervisor in the homicide unit. The investigation was quickly handed over to Detective Stewart, a veteran homicide investigator with 21 years of experience. Even for someone who had spent over 2 decades dealing with the darkest aspects of human nature, this crime scene was particularly harrowing. It was clear that a violent struggle had taken place, starting right at the front door. There were signs of blunt force trauma on the victims, and the sheer volume of duct tape used to bind them suggested a cold, calculated cruelty. Yet, as the crime scene investigators began to meticulously process the apartment, they discovered a series of clues that seemed almost too convenient. On the coffee table lay a plate of crushed prescription pills, alongside a half-burned marijuana cigarette. Most striking of all was a light blue bandana carefully wrapped around a beer bottle, left in plain sight. In Arlington, certain local gangs were known to use blue bandanas as their signature color, often leaving them behind as a way to claim responsibility or extort local business owners. To an outsider, it looked like a clear-cut case of a robbery committed by local gang members. But Detective Stewart and his team were skeptical. The crime scene felt staged, as if someone had deliberately placed these items to point the police in the wrong direction. The detectives began their work by interviewing the family members, seeking to understand who would want to harm such a gentle, hard-working couple. The only family member composed enough to speak with the investigators was Chow Tran, the son-in-law. Chow explained that the family had gathered the night before to celebrate his father-in-law's birthday. The couple had a wonderful time and stayed until 10:30 in the evening, when another relative drove them home. That was the last time anyone had seen them alive. Chow also shared details about the family business. When Long and Hong first arrived in Texas, they had started a commercial sewing business, enlisting Chow to help manage it because of his strong English skills. For a time, they had achieved remarkable success, even securing prestigious contracts with major commercial brands like Disney. However, by the year 2011, their good fortune had begun to fade. They lost their primary contracts, and the business began to decline rapidly, leaving the family in deep financial distress. To cope with this heavy burden, the deeply traditional couple turned to spiritual beliefs from their homeland. They believed that their string of bad luck was a result of a spiritual curse, and they began searching for someone who could perform rituals to lift the heavy cloud hanging over their lives. Through a local Vietnamese newspaper, Chow and his mother-in-law discovered an advertisement for a spiritual advisor located 250 miles away in Houston. This advisor, a woman named Daphne Wright, claimed she possessed the power to remove negative energy, lift curses, and restore prosperity. Desperate to save their business and protect their family, Hong Lee and Chow contacted Daphne and traveled to her home for a consultation. Over the course of the following year, they placed their ultimate trust in her, hoping that her rituals would turn their fortunes around. Instead of finding peace, however, they found themselves trapped in an even deeper hole. As the investigation continued, the detectives attended the autopsy at the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's office. The medical examiner confirmed that while the victims had suffered physical trauma, the actual cause of death was suffocation due to layers of duct tape wrapped tightly around their faces. It was a heartbreaking revelation that only strengthened the detectives' resolve to bring the perpetrators to justice. A breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. Detective Stewart received a call from an insurance company, informing him that the elderly couple held a substantial life insurance policy worth at least $1 million, with Chow Tran named as one of the primary beneficiaries. While Chow had a solid alibi for the night of the murders, cooperating fully with the police and providing DNA and fingerprint samples, the detectives kept all possibilities open. They tested the DNA from the marijuana cigarette found at the scene, but it did not match anyone in the national database at the time. With no immediate matches and no new leads, the case unfortunately went cold for over 2 years. Then, in October of the year 2015, a sudden spark brought the investigation back to life. The National DNA Database flagged a match for the DNA found on the marijuana cigarette from the crime scene. The match belonged to Willie Guillory, who had recently been convicted of a felony involving the theft of a horse in Houston. Back in the year 2012, Willie had been only 16 years old with no prior criminal record, which was why his DNA had not been in the system when the murders first occurred. Detectives wasted no time in bringing the young man in for questioning. When confronted with the scientific evidence linking him directly to the apartment in Arlington, Willie broke down in tears and confessed. He revealed that he had not acted alone. He had been accompanied by his uncle, Bobby Guillory, a 52-year-old man who was struggling financially at the time. Even more shocking was Willie's revelation that they had been hired to commit the crime by none other than Daphne Wright, the spiritual advisor from Houston. According to Willie, Daphne had orchestrated the entire plan because the family owed her an astronomical amount of money for her services, somewhere between $250,000 and $280,000. When the family was unable to pay, Daphne decided to collect the money by targeting their life insurance policies. On December 16, 2015, police arrested Bobby Guillory. Facing the weight of the evidence, Bobby also confessed, confirming his nephew's story. He admitted that Daphne had promised him $10,000 to carry out the deed. Taking advantage of his financial desperation, Bobby further revealed that Daphne had provided him with the key to the apartment, which he had allegedly obtained from Chow Tran himself. Armed with this critical information, detectives arrested Daphne right at her home in Houston. During a search of her residence, investigators discovered detailed financial ledgers showing that she regularly charged clients tens of thousands of dollars for her spiritual services. In August of the year 2019, Daphne Wright was brought to trial. The courtroom was filled with tension as Chow Tran, who had been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, took the stand. Chow described how Daphne had used her spiritual influence to control and manipulate his family, creating a sense of fear that ultimately led to the tragic events. The defense argued that Chow was far more complicit than he claimed, pointing out that he had ultimately received a substantial financial payout from the insurance policies. After hearing all the evidence, the jury found Daphne Wright guilty of capital murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that she would never again be able to exploit or harm others. Bobby and Willie Guillory were also held accountable for their roles in the crime. Though some questions regarding the full extent of everyone's involvement remained, the dedication of the Arlington Police Department ensured that the truth was brought to light. The memory of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee lived on through their children and the community that loved them, serving as a reminder of the enduring power of justice, the strength of family bonds, and the ultimate triumph of truth over darkness. The American dream is a fragile tapestry woven with threads of hope, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of a better life. For Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, this dream began with a journey across the ocean, leaving behind the familiar landscapes of Vietnam to build a future for their children in the sprawling, culturally diverse city of Arlington, Texas. By the turn of the millennium, the couple had established themselves as pillars of their community, embodying the resilience and industry of those who seek to turn a vision into reality. They were not merely immigrants. They were architects of a family legacy, working tirelessly in the commercial sewing industry, eventually securing contracts that promised stability and prosperity. Yet, life has a way of introducing unforeseen variables into even the most carefully constructed plans. By the year 2011, the winds of fortune had shifted. The lucrative contracts that had sustained their livelihood began to vanish, and the business, once a beacon of success, started to drift into the precarious waters of financial instability. In moments of profound distress, human beings often reach for anchors that transcend the material world. Long and Hong, deeply rooted in their traditional beliefs, sought solace and guidance in the ancient mysticism of their homeland. They believed that their misfortune was not merely a matter of economic fluctuations, but perhaps the result of unseen forces, curses that required spiritual intervention to be lifted. In their search for restoration, they were led to a woman named Daphne Wright, a spiritual advisor operating out of Houston. To the desperate, the promise of Savior often appears as a guiding light, and Daphne positioned herself as a conduit for fortune, claiming the power to remove malevolent curses and restore prosperity. Entrusted with their faith and their dwindling finances, the couple began a cycle of payments that would ultimately prove to be their undoing. What began as a search for blessing descended into a dark, coercive relationship as their debt to Daphne ballooned into hundreds of thousands of dollars. The spiritual advisor revealed a much colder, more transactional nature than the couple had ever anticipated. The atmosphere of the Nguyen household, once defined by the warmth of family gatherings and the quiet pride of hard work, became thick with an unspoken, suffocating tension. Behind closed doors, the pressure to satisfy Daphne's insatiable demands grew unbearable. Her influence over the family was not based on divine benevolence, but on the exploitation of fear and the psychological chains she had forged through their shared desperation. When the payments failed to manifest, the tone of her communications shifted from mystical guidance to lethal ultimatums. She made it clear that her financial interests were absolute, and the cost of non-payment would be nothing short of life itself. The fateful day arrived on June the 10th, 2012. The quiet morning in Arlington was shattered by a welfare check request that would reveal a scene of unimaginable horror. Chow Tran, the son-in-law of the victims, had reached out to emergency dispatchers, his voice heavy with foreboding that permeated the family. Upon the arrival of law enforcement, the residents presented a tableau of chaos that defied the peaceful reputation of the inhabitants. Investigators were confronted with a scene that appeared, at first glance, to be a burglary that had escalated into tragedy. However, the sheer brutality of the act, the hog-tied victims, the extensive use of duct tape, and the calculated violence pointed toward a motive far more sinister than simple theft. As detectives delved deeper into the wreckage of the lives left behind, they navigated a labyrinth of deception. The crime scene was cluttered with items intended to mislead: a blue bandana, a beer bottle, and traces of narcotics, all carefully arranged to cast suspicion upon local gang activity. Yet, for the seasoned investigators, these clues felt too orchestrated, a performance designed to obscure a much colder, more deliberate truth. The investigation soon shifted from the streets to the heart of the family, as the presence of a substantial life insurance policy cast a long, cynical shadow over the grieving relatives. The path to uncovering the truth was long and fraught with silence. For 3 years, the case remained in the cold, unyielding grip of uncertainty, a haunting reminder of lives cut short. It was only through the intervention of chance, a separate felony arrest of a young man named Willie Guillory, that the facade began to crumble. When DNA evidence retrieved from the crime scene finally linked back to Willie, the walls of the conspirators' silence began to collapse. Willie, who had been a mere teenager at the time of the crime, described a terrifying sequence of events dictated by his uncle, Bobby Guillory, and ultimately orchestrated by the woman they fear above all others, Daphne Wright. The narrative that emerged was one of a calculated, cold-blooded murder-for-hire scheme. Daphne had not only leveraged the couple's spiritual beliefs against them, but had also infiltrated their circle, manipulating their fear to ensure the successful execution of her lethal demands. Bobby Guillory, desperate and hungry, had been transformed into an instrument of her greed, fueled by the promise of financial reward. The revelation that the keys to the home had been provided, the scene staged to divert blame, and the cold logic used to justify the loss of human life left investigators and the community reeling. The subsequent trials unfolded as a stark examination of the power dynamics between the predator and the prey. Daphne Wright, the self-proclaimed spiritual savior, was unmasked as a heartless architect of destruction, despite the legal complexities and the labyrinthine testimony of those involved. The weight of the evidence proved insurmountable. The jury's conviction of Daphne stood as a testament to the pursuit of justice, ensuring that she would spend the remainder of her life behind bars, removed from the society she had so ruthlessly exploited. For those who investigated the case, the outcome left a lingering, bittersweet resonance. While a measure of accountability had been achieved, the moral ambiguity surrounding the involvement of other family members continued to haunt the edges of the narrative. The tragedy of Long and Hong served as a profound reminder of the vulnerability of the human spirit when confronted by the intersection of blind faith and calculated malice. Their American dream, once vibrant and full of promise, had been silenced by the greed of a few, leaving behind a legacy that now serves as a cautionary tale for all who value the sanctity of life and the dangers of placing absolute trust in the hands of those who offer miracles at a price. As the case closed, the truth remained. The shadows of the past can be long, but eventually, even the deepest darkness must yield to the light of discovery. The summer heat in Texas has a way of pressing down on a city like a heavy, humid hand. In the early morning hours of June 10th, 2012, the city of Arlington was already beginning to simmer under a pale blue sky. On most days, this part of the state woke up to the quiet hum of air conditioners and the distant murmur of highway traffic. But on this particular Sunday, the silence in one suburban neighborhood was about to be shattered by a revelation so grim that it would linger in the minds of veteran investigators for decades to come. Officer Weller had seen his fair share of troubled mornings during his 14 years on the force. He was a man who believed in the simple, quiet order of community life. When the dispatch call came through at 7:29 in the morning, it seemed like a routine matter, the kind of call that usually ended with a polite conversation and a sigh of relief. A welfare check had been requested by a 38-year-old Vietnamese immigrant named Chow Tran. Chow had called the emergency line, his voice trembling with a mixture of anxiety and confusion, asking officers to check on his elderly in-laws, Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. When Officer Weller arrived at the apartment complex, the scene immediately struck him as unusual. Typically, a welfare check involved a single concerned relative or neighbor who had not seen someone for a few days. Here, an entire family had gathered on the manicure grass outside the apartment. They stood together in a tight, anxious cluster, their faces etched with deep concern. Chow Tran stood near the front, gesturing toward the building. He explained that his teenage son had gone up to knock on the door, but there had been no answer. The family had then noticed that one of the windows to the residence was slightly open. Something felt entirely wrong. The air was thick with an unspoken dread, a collective intuition that whispered of danger. Too terrified to step inside the home themselves, they waited on the pavement, looking to the uniform of the law for protection and answers. Officer Weller walked up the stairs, his boots echoing against the concrete. He called out as he pushed the door open, his voice steady but cautious. There was no response. The apartment was bathed in the dim light of early morning, and at first glance, it appeared as though a hurricane had swept through the small living space. The responding officers noted that the home was in a state of complete disarray. The silent closet. As Officer Weller moved deeper into the apartment, his senses were on high alert. The living room was a chaotic mess of overturned items and scattered belongings. He checked the kitchen, then the bathroom. Nothing. The only room left to inspect was the master bedroom. When he first crossed the threshold of the bedroom, his eyes did not immediately register the horror that lay in wait. His primary focus was simply finding the elderly couple, hoping against hope that they had merely stepped out for an early morning walk or were staying with another relative. He turned to leave the room, his flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. Then he stopped. On the wall next to a very small closet, his flashlight caught the distinct shape of hand smudges. It was a subtle detail, but to an experienced officer, it was a silent cry for help left behind on the drywall. Weller hesitated. Every instinct in his body, that quiet inner voice that warns of incoming trauma, told him to proceed with caution, but duty demanded that he open the door. With a slow, careful movement, he pulled the closet door open. Inside the cramped space lay the bodies of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. They had been hog-tied with thick silver duct tape. Their heads and mouths were wrapped completely in layers of the adhesive material. The narrow space of the closet was stained with a terrible amount of blood. In that split second, Weller knew there was no aid to be rendered. They were gone. For a moment, the veteran officer stood frozen in the center of the apartment. The sheer brutality of the scene was overwhelming. He walked out of the bedroom, past the scattered belongings in the living room, and stepped into the hallway. For several seconds, he was unable to speak, unable to even pick up his radio to call for backup. When he finally found his voice, he requested a supervisor and the homicide unit. The investigation begins. The Arlington homicide detectives arrived quickly, led by Detective Stewart, a seasoned investigator with 21 years of experience in solving the city's darkest mysteries. Even for a man who had spent more than 2 decades peering into the abyss of human cruelty, this scene was particularly devastating. The physical evidence suggested a struggle of immense violence. There were signs that the elderly couple had fought desperately for their lives, grabbing at the walls as they were forced toward the back of the apartment. Furniture in the living room was overturned, and compact discs were scattered across the carpet, giving the initial impression of a robbery gone wrong. ++ crime scene evidence. ++ overturned living room furniture, scattered compact discs across the carpet, hand smudges on the closet wall, plate of crushed prescription pills on the coffee table, a discarded marijuana cigarette, a blue bandana wrapped around a beer bottle. ++. But as Detective Stewart examined the details, a sense of skepticism began to take root. On the coffee table lay a plate of crushed prescription pills, arranged as if someone had intended to snort them. Nearby, a discarded marijuana cigarette rested in an ashtray. Most striking of all was a light blue bandana carefully wrapped around a beer bottle, left in plain sight. In Arlington, gang activity was a known reality, and certain local gangs were notorious for extorting money from businesses and residents. The light blue bandana was a recognized color symbol. To an outsider, it looked like a clear calling card, a statement of responsibility left by young criminals. But to Detective Stewart, it felt too deliberate. The crime was exceedingly violent, far beyond what was typical for a standard burglary or a gang initiation. Most gang members seeking quick cash did not spend the time or effort required to bind victims in such a meticulous, torturous manner. The scene began to look less like a random act of street violence and more like a carefully constructed stage play designed to mislead the police. The legacy of the American dream. To understand why anyone would want to harm Long Nguyen and Hong Lu, the detectives had to look back at the history of the family. The elderly couple had immigrated to the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000. Like many before them, they left behind the familiar landscapes of their homeland to build a legacy for their 3 children and grandchildren in Texas. Arlington was home to a vibrant, industrious Vietnamese community that had grown steadily since the late 1970s, following the fall of Saigon. Many families had successfully adapted to American society while holding tightly to their cultural heritage. Long and Hong were no exception. They were widely known as a sweet, generous, and hard-working couple who kept to themselves and never caused trouble for anyone. Upon arriving in Texas, they established a commercial sewing business. Because their son-in-law, Chow Tran, spoke the best English in the family, He became the public face of the enterprise, handling contracts, talking with suppliers, and managing the day-to-day business relations. For nearly a decade, their hard work paid off. They managed to secure lucrative manufacturing contracts, including work for prominent national entertainment brands. They were living the American dream. But by 2011, the tide of fortune had turned. The business lost its major contracts, and financial ruin began to loom over the family. In times of severe crisis, when practical solutions seemed to fail, the family turned to the traditional beliefs of their homeland. In many traditional cultures, when a streak of bad luck persists, it is believed to be the result of a spiritual curse or a misalignment of cosmic fortune. Some families seek out spiritual advisors to perform rituals meant to cleanse a home and restore prosperity. Chao Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong Le, began searching through local Vietnamese language newspapers for a spiritual solution. Deep in the classified sections, they found an advertisement for a spiritual advisor based in Houston, some 250 miles away. The woman, named Daphne Wright, claimed she possessed the power to lift terrible curses and bring abundant good fortune to those in need. A shadow in Houston. Encouraged by his mother-in-law, Chao Tran reached out to Daphne Wright. He traveled to her home in Houston for a consultation, hoping that her rituals could reverse the downward spiral of their sewing business. Daphne performed her ceremonies, and for a short time, the family felt a renewed sense of hope. They believed that their luck was finally about to change. But a year later, the sewing business remained in ruins, and the financial pressure had only intensified. Instead of bringing prosperity, the family's involvement with the spiritual advisor had pulled them into an even deeper, darker hole. Following the discovery of the bodies on June 10, 2012, the detectives focused their attention on gathering immediate forensic evidence. The autopsy conducted at the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's office revealed the true horror of the couple's final moments. While there was clear evidence of blunt force trauma to their heads, the physical blows were not the cause of death. Hong Lee's face had been wrapped in 25 feet of heavy duct tape. Her husband, Long, had been bound with 10 feet of tape around his head and mouth. They had died of suffocation. The sheer cruelty of the act suggested a deep personal animosity, or a desperate desire to ensure they could never speak again. As detectives processed the scene, they received a routine notification that changed the direction of the inquiry. An insurance company representative called to report that the deceased couple carried substantial life insurance policies totaling approximately $1 million. When Detective Stewart inquired about the beneficiaries, the name that came up was Chao Tran. Alibis and dead ends. On June 13, 2012, detectives brought Chao Tran into the Arlington Police Station for a formal interview. He explained that the life insurance policies had been established to ensure the sewing business could continue to operate and support the family if either of the elders passed away. When questioned about his whereabouts on the night of the murders, Chao provided a detailed timeline. He explained that the entire family had gathered to celebrate his father-in-law's birthday. The party had lasted until approximately 10 o'clock in the evening, after which the elderly couple had been driven home by another relative. Chao and his immediate family had returned to their own home, providing each other with consistent, interlocking alibis. Timeline of alibis. Afternoon. Family gathers for a birthday celebration. 10 p.m. Long and Hong are driven home by a relative. 10:30 p.m. Remaining family members arrive at their homes. Night. Interlocking family statements confirm locations. The police collected DNA samples and fingerprints from Chao and every other family member who had attended the gathering. They compared these samples to the physical evidence collected from the apartment, particularly the discarded marijuana cigarette. When the laboratory results returned, there was no match. The DNA found on the cigarette did not belong to Chao Tran. nor did it match any profile in the national database. The case seemed to hit a brick wall. Over the next 2 years, investigators interviewed more than 50 people, including neighbors, business associates, and local community members. But every lead led to a dead end. The files were placed in storage, and the case grew cold. The horse and the breakthrough. 3 years passed in silence. Then, in October of 2015, a sudden spark of light illuminated the forgotten case. A young man named Willie Guillory was arrested in Houston for felony theft of a horse. Because a felony conviction requires the collection of a DNA sample for the national database, Willie's profile was entered into the system. Within days, the computer flagged a match. The DNA on the discarded marijuana cigarette found at the scene of the Arlington murders in 2012 belonged to Willie Guillory. At the time of the murders, Willie had been only 16 years old. Because he was a minor with no prior felony record, his genetic profile had never been entered into the system. His arrest for a horse theft as an adult was the single missing link the police needed. Detectives brought Willie Guillory to the Arlington police station. At first, he denied ever being in Arlington, but when Detective Stewart explained the infallible science of DNA and how his genetic signature had been recovered from the very room where the elderly couple died, the young man broke down in tears. He confessed to his involvement, but he insisted he was not the mastermind. Willie explained that in June of 2012, his 49-year-old uncle, Bobby Guillory, had told him they were going to make a trip to Arlington to handle a job. Willie, feeling he had little choice but to follow his elder's instructions, went along. According to Willie, his uncle had been given a key to the apartment. They entered the home while the couple was away, throwing items around and staging the scene to look like a random gang robbery. They left the blue bandana, the crush pills, and the beer bottle to mislead investigators. Willie had smoked a portion of a marijuana cigarette, leaving behind the small piece of evidence that would eventually seal their fate. When the elderly couple returned home, the staged burglary turned into a scene of physical violence. Willie claimed he ran to block the door to prevent Hong Lu from escaping, while his uncle Bobby subdued Long Nguyen with a blunt object. Once the couple was incapacitated, Bobby used the duct tape to bind them and moved them into the small bedroom closet, where they were left to perish. The spiritual loan shark. When asked why they had targeted a quiet, elderly couple they had never met, Willie revealed a crucial name, Daphne Wright. He explained that his Uncle Bobby was a friend of Daphne's, and that Daphne had orchestrated the entire plot because the family owed her a massive amount of money. Detectives moved quickly to arrest Bobby Guillory at his home in Katy, Texas. Facing the prospect of capital murder charges, Bobby also confessed. He painted a vivid picture of Daphne Wright, describing her as a spiritual loan shark who preyed on the desperation of her clients. Bobby explained that the sewing business had never recovered, but Chow Tran had continued to pay Daphne vast sums of money for rituals and spiritual interventions. Over time, Chow and Hong Lu had run up a debt with Daphne that ballooned to between $250,000 and $280,000. Daphne was not a person to forgive a debt. When she realized the family had no way of paying her back in cash, she learned about the substantial life insurance policies. She proposed a dark solution. If the elderly couple were to pass away, the insurance payout would cover the debt in full. According to Bobby, Daphne had provided him with the key to the apartment and promised him $10,000 to carry out the deed. When investigators asked Bobby how Daphne had obtained the key to the residence, Bobby looked directly at the detectives and delivered a shocking revelation. He claimed she had received the key directly from Chow Tran. The Ledger of Curses. On August 31st, 2016, detectives executed a search warrant at Daphne Wright's home in Houston. To the outside world, Daphne was a mother of 3 daughters, married to a quiet husband, and running a popular spiritual consulting business. But inside her home, detectives discovered a ledger that detailed the true nature of her operations. The ledger contained meticulous records of clients who were charged $10, $20, $30, and even $40,000 for various spiritual services, including the removal and application of curses. It was a highly lucrative business built entirely on psychological manipulation and fear. With Daphne and the Guillory men in custody, prosecutors focused on building a solid case. To secure a conviction against the mastermind who had stayed far away from the crime scene, they needed the testimony of someone who had direct knowledge of the agreement. They turned to Chow Tran. In exchange for his full cooperation and testimony, prosecutors offered Chow immunity from prosecution. It was a difficult decision, a deal with the devil, but it was deemed necessary to ensure that Daphne Wright would never walk free again. Chow Tran took the stand during Daphne's trial in August of 2019. He portrayed Daphne as a terrifying, manipulative figure who held absolute sway over his family's decisions. He claimed that his mother-in-law, Hong, had been so fearful of Daphne's supposed spiritual wrath that she had volunteered a sacrifice herself so the family could collect the insurance money to pay the debt. The defense argued passionately that Chow was a liar who had orchestrated the scheme himself to pocket the $850,000 left over from the insurance payout. They pointed out the complete lack of any written documentation regarding the massive debt Chow claimed to owe. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury found Daphne Wright guilty of capital murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bobby and Willie Guillory also received lengthy prison sentences for their roles in the conspiracy. For the investigators who had spent years searching for the truth, the conviction brought a measure of peace, though a sense of unease remained. While the hands that carried out the violence and the voice that ordered it were behind bars, the betrayal at the heart of the family would always linger as a reminder of how easily the search for hope can be twisted into a nightmare. The morning sun of June 10, 2012, did not bring warmth to Arlington, Texas. Instead, it cast a cold, revealing light over a quiet apartment complex where the silence was suddenly shattered by fear. Chow Tran, a 38-year-old Vietnamese immigrant, stood outside the home of his elderly in-laws, his hands trembling as he held his mobile phone. The air was thick with humidity, but a cold shiver ran down his spine. At 7:29 in the morning, he finally made the call to emergency dispatchers, his voice cracking under the weight of an escalating dread. He requested a welfare check on his father-in-law, Long Nguyen, who was 70-something years old, and his mother-in-law, Hong Lee. The dispatcher on the other end of the line tried to gather details, but Chow's panic was difficult to contain. He explained that his teenage son and his wife had gone to look through the window. They had seen everything fallen down inside the apartment. Things were in total disarray. The boy had knocked on the door repeatedly, but there was no answer, only an ominous, heavy silence. The family began to gather on the pavement outside, their anxiety growing with every passing minute. They had noticed that a window to the residence was slightly open, a detail that felt deeply wrong. Too terrified to step inside and face whatever lay beyond that open window. They waited in the driveway, huddled together, praying for the arrival of the police. Officer Weller was the first to receive the dispatch. When he pulled up to the scene, he immediately realized this was not a typical welfare check. Usually, such calls came later in the day, and it was highly unusual to see an entire family standing outside an apartment so early in the morning, their faces pale with terror. Weller approached the front door, calling out as he stepped inside. There was no answer. The interior of the apartment was in complete disarray, bearing all the telltale signs of burglary. The living room was ransacked, with compact discs thrown about and furniture overturned. Weller walked cautiously through the space, checking the kitchen and the bathroom. He found no one. The only room left to check was the master bedroom. Weller stepped into the bedroom. At first, he did not notice anything that stood out. His sole focus was on finding the elderly couple, hoping they had simply gone out for an early morning walk and left the door unlocked. He turned to leave the room, his flashlight beam sweeping across the walls. That was when he paused. On the wall next to a very small closet, he saw dark hand smudges. A sudden hesitation gripped him. Every instinct inside him screamed not to open that closet door. But duty compelled him forward. He reached out, took hold of the handle, and pulled the door open. Inside the cramped space lay two people. It was the mother and the father he had been looking for. They were hog-tied with duct tape. Their heads and mouths were heavily wrapped in the silver adhesive. There was blood everywhere. In that split second, Weller knew they were dead. Even with 14 years of experience on the force, it was the most gruesome, brutal scene he had ever witnessed. In a state of shock, Weller walked out of the bedroom and stood in the middle of the living room, unable to speak, unable to even use his radio for a moment. When he finally regained his composure, he requested a supervisor and a crime scene unit. Chapter 2, The Illusion of Order. When the veteran homicide investigators arrived, they were equally stunned by the sheer violence of the scene. The elderly couple had been beaten with some kind of blunt force object. Dark bloodstains on the carpet, the couch, the table, and the walls indicated that the struggle had begun the moment they walked through their front door. It appeared they had been grabbed and dragged toward the back room, their hands desperately grasping at the walls as they were forced into the bedroom. Initially, detectives theorized that it was a robbery gone wrong. However, the extreme violence seemed entirely disproportionate for a simple theft. Detective Stewart, a seasoned investigator with 21 years in homicide, noted that the victims suffered severe blunt force trauma to their foreheads, with markings that suggested the use of a tool like a hammer. But the most disturbing element was the duct tape. Hong Lee's face had been wrapped in 25 feet of duct tape, while Long Wen's face was bound with 10 feet of tape. They had not died from the beatings. They had suffocated. The neighborhood was left in mourning. Long and Hong were known as a sweet, generous, and hard-working couple who never bothered anyone. They had immigrated to the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000, bringing their 3 children and their cherished cultural traditions to Arlington to pursue the American dream. They established a commercial sewing business, enlisting their son-in-law, Chow Tran, to handle the English-speaking contractors. For a time, they thrived, even securing a lucrative contract to manufacture garments for Disney. But by 2011, their good fortune had vanished. The Disney contract was lost, and the business began a rapid downward spiral. Desperate to save their livelihood, the family sought a traditional spiritual solution. In many Vietnamese communities, it is customary to consult a spiritual advisor when facing severe crises, like financial ruin. Chow and his mother-in-law found an advertisement in a local Vietnamese newspaper for a spiritual advisor based in Houston, some 250 miles away. Her name was Daphne Wright. Daphne advertised that she could lift bad curses and perform rituals to bring good fortune. Believing she could turn their business around, Chow traveled to Houston for a consultation. He returned full of hope, but instead of bringing luck, the connection initiated a chain of events that would end in a double murder. At the crime scene, detectives discovered several odd clues. On the coffee table lay a plate of crushed prescription pills and a marijuana cigarette. More suspiciously, a light blue bandana was wrapped around a beer bottle. Arlington had active Vietnamese gangs, and the light blue color was associated with one of them. It seemed like a gang calling card, a sign that they were taking responsibility for crime. Yet, experienced detectives began to feel skeptical. The crime scene felt too perfect, almost staged. Most local gang members did not commit such highly stylized, ritualistic murders of elderly people without a clear extortion motive. Soon, a routine call from an insurance company changed the direction of the entire investigation. The company reported that the deceased couple held a life insurance policy worth at least $1 million. The primary beneficiary was none other than Chow Tran. Chapter 3, The Long Cold Road. On June 13, 2012, detectives interviewed Chow Tran at the police station. Chow explained that the insurance policy was intended to ensure the business could survive if one of the family members passed away. When questioned about his whereabouts on the night of the murders, Chow provided an airtight alibi. He explained that the family had gathered for a birthday party to celebrate his father-in-law. Afterward, they had returned to his house, eaten, and played cards until past 10 o'clock. The police collected DNA and fingerprint samples from Chow and other family members, comparing them to the evidence collected from the apartment. They had managed to retrieve a clean DNA profile from the marijuana cigarette found on the coffee table. Detectives were hopeful that this would be the key to identifying the killer, but the results brought a major disappointment. The DNA did not match Chow, any family members, or any profiles stored in the national database known as CODIS. For over 2 years, the investigation stalled. With no matches and no new leads, the case turned completely cold. It seemed the killers had committed the perfect crime, leaving behind stage gang clues and a DNA profile belonging to someone with no prior criminal record. The breakthrough came in October of 2015. The police received a notification that the DNA from the marijuana cigarette finally matched a profile newly entered into the database. The match belonged to Willie Guillory, a young man who had recently been convicted of felony for stealing a horse in Houston. At the time of the murders in 2012, Willie had been only 16 years old. Because he was a minor with no prior felony convictions, his DNA had never been entered into the system until his arrest as an adult. On October 17, 2015, detectives brought Willie Guillory in for questioning. When confronted with the scientific evidence placing him inside the apartment, the young man broke down in tears and confessed. He revealed that he had not acted alone. He had been accompanied by his 49-year-old uncle, Bobby Guillory. According to Willie, his uncle had driven him from Houston to Arlington on June 9th, 2012. Bobby had a key to the apartment, which allowed them to enter without forcing the door. Bobby instructed Willie to throw items around and leave the beer bottle, the blue bandana, and the crushed pills to make it look like a gang-related robbery. Willie had smoked a portion of the marijuana cigarette and left it behind, unaware that it would eventually lead to their capture. When the elderly couple returned home, the burglary turned into a violent ambush. Willie ran to stop Hong Lee from escaping or screaming, while Bobby grabbed Long Nguyen and beat him with a blunt object. Once the victims were incapacitated, the two men used duct tape to bind them and carried them into the bedroom closet, leaving them to suffocate. When asked why they had targeted the couple, Willie pointed directly to a woman named Daphne Wright, a friend of his uncle. He claimed Daphne was the mastermind who provided the key and ordered the hit because the family owed her a massive amount of money. Chapter 4. The Price of the Curse. Following Willie's confession, detectives tracked down Bobby Guillory in Katy, Texas, on December 16, 2015. Confronted with a search warrant for his DNA, Bobby confessed to his role in the murders. He claimed he was desperate for money after being laid off and had agreed to help Daphne in exchange for $10,000. Bobby described Daphne Wright as a spiritual loan shark. Over the years, Chow and his mother-in-law had run up a massive debt with her, which had ballooned to between $250,000 and $280,000 as they repeatedly paid for rituals to lift the supposed curse on their business. When they could no longer pay, Daphne discovered they held substantial life insurance policies. She allegedly decided that the only way to recover her money was to have the couple killed so Chow could collect the insurance payout. Most shocking of all, Bobby claimed that Daphne had obtained the key to the apartment directly from Chow Tran. On August 31st, 2016, detectives arrested Daphne right at her home in Houston. Inside, they discovered detailed ledgers showing that she charged clients tens of thousands of dollars for spiritual services, including placing and removing curses. Although Daphne refused to speak without a lawyer, Prosecutors knew they needed a strong witness to secure a conviction against her. They approached Chow Tran with an offer of immunity in exchange for his full testimony. With his lawyer present, Chow painted a chilling picture of Daphne's control over his family. He claimed that he and his mother-in-law were terrified of Daphne's spiritual powers, believing she could place a devastating curse on them if they failed to pay. Chow even claimed that Hong Li had offered to sacrifice herself so the family could collect the insurance money to clear their debt. Detectives found the story of the mother-in-law's voluntary sacrifice absurd, but they recognized that Chow's testimony was essential to convicting the coordinator of the plot. In August of 2019, Daphne Wright stood trial for capital murder. Chow took the stand, portraying her as a ruthless, greedy woman who orchestrated the killings. The defense argued that Chow was the true instigator, pointing out that the $850,000 of insurance money had gone directly into Chow's pocket, and that there was no written documentation of the alleged $280,000 debt. Ultimately, the jury found Daphne Wright guilty of capital murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bobby and Willie Guillory were also held accountable for their roles in the conspiracy. Because of the immunity agreement, Chow Tran walked free, a resolution that left the lead investigators with a lingering sense of injustice. Yet, they remained hopeful that the truth would eventually bring complete accountability, believing that what is done in the dark must eventually come to light. The summer sun in Texas has a way of baking the earth until the pavement shimmers like water in the distance. In the city of Arlington, a place where communities of different cultures weave together into a rich and colorful tapestry. The morning of June 10, 2012, began with deceptive stillness. The birds were singing in the leafy branches of the oak trees, and the hum of early morning traffic was just beginning to rise. But within the quiet walls of a modest apartment complex, a tragedy had unfolded that would shake the local community to its core and challenge the resolve of even the most experienced investigators. Part 1. The Threads of the American Dream. To understand the weight of what occurred, one must first look back to the year 2000, when an elderly couple named Long Nguyen and Hong Lu made the brave decision to leave their homeland of Vietnam. Like many before them, they were drawn by the promise of the American dream. They wanted to build a safe, prosperous legacy for their 3 beloved children and their growing circle of grandchildren. They settled in Arlington, Texas, a bustling city within Tarrant County known for its vibrant and supportive Vietnamese community, which had flourished in waves ever since 1975. Long and Hong were a gentle, warm-hearted couple. Their neighbors knew them as sweet, generous souls who never bothered anyone. They brought with them their time-honored traditions, their deep spiritual beliefs, and an unshakable work ethic. Soon after arriving, they established a commercial sewing business. Because their English was limited, they relied heavily on their 38-year-old son-in-law, Chow Tran, to help run the operations. Chow, who spoke English fluently, became the public face of the business, coordinating with contractors and navigating the complex commercial landscape. For nearly a decade, their hard work bore fruit. They secured lucrative contracts, including prestigious agreements with major entertainment giants like Disney. The family felt a profound sense of pride and gratitude. They had built a life of dignity from the ground up, proving that dedication and family unity could overcome any barrier. However, by the year 2011, the tides of fortune began to turn. The global economy shifted, the vital contract with Disney was lost, and the commercial sewing business began a steep and stressful decline. Desperate to protect their livelihood and rescue their family from financial ruin, Long and Hong looked to the cultural traditions of their homeland. In many traditional East Asian cultures, spiritual harmony is believed to be directly tied to worldly success. When faced with major life crises, such as bankruptcy, legal troubles, or deep personal distress, families often seek the guidance of a spiritual advisor to perform rituals of protection and Healing, inviting luck and warding off negative energies. Searching through a local Vietnamese newspaper, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong Le, found an advertisement for a spiritual advisor located 250 miles away in Houston. The woman advertised herself as a powerful mystic who could lift curses, bring good fortune, and restore balance to those in need. Her name was Daphne Wright. Encouraged by Hong's deep faith, Chow contacted Daphne and drove to her Houston home for a consultation. Daphne performed a traditional ritual, and for a brief moment, the family felt a renewed sense of hope. They believed they were finally on the path to recovery, but instead of restoring their fortune, this connection would slowly draw them into a web of manipulation, greed, and ultimate darkness. Part 2. The Discovery on a Summer Morning. On the morning of June 10th, 2012, at 7:29 in the morning, an emergency dispatcher in Arlington received a frantic phone call from Chow Tran. He requested a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, explaining that his family had gathered outside the apartment and noticed that a window was open. Things did not look right. Chow's teenage son had knocked on the door, but there was no response. Terrified of what they might find, the family waited outside for the authorities to arrive. Officer Weller, a seasoned police officer, was dispatched to the scene. Even from a distance, he could tell this was not a typical welfare check. An entire family was standing outside the apartment complex in the quiet. Early hours of the morning, their faces clouded with intense worry. Upon entering the residence, Officer Weller immediately noticed signs of an apparent burglary. The living room was in complete disarray, with compact discs scattered across the floor and furniture overturned. He called out, but his voice echoed back through the quiet rooms. The kitchen and bathroom were empty. Finally, he approached the bedroom. At first glance, the bedroom appeared empty. Officer Weller turned to leave, but as his flashlight swept across the wall, he noticed faint hand smudges next to a very small closet door. A sense of deep hesitation washed over him. Every instinct told him that opening that door would change everything, yet his duty compelled him forward. He opened the closet door. Inside, he discovered the bodies of Long Nguyen and Hong Le. They had been hog-tied with duct tape, and their heads and mouths were heavily bound. The scene was devastatingly violent. Officer Weller, despite his 14 years of experience, was left in absolute shock. He walked out of the bedroom into the living room, unable to speak or even use his radio immediately. When he finally collected himself, he called for a supervisor and the crime scene unit. Detective Stewart, a veteran homicide investigator with 21 years on the force, soon arrived. He was stunned by the sheer brutality of the crime. The physical evidence suggested that the elderly couple had been attacked the moment they stepped through their front door. There was blood on the carpet, the couch, the table, and the walls. Furthermore, the perpetrators had left behind highly specific clues. A plate of crushed prescription pills sat on the coffee table, a marijuana cigarette lay nearby, and a light blue bandana was wrapped tightly around a beer bottle. To the initial investigators, this looked like the calling card of an active local Vietnamese gang, perhaps a robbery or extortion attempt gone horribly wrong. Yet, Detective Stewart remained deeply skeptical. The crime scene felt almost too perfect, as if someone had deliberately staged the gang-related items to mislead the police. In his experience, most gang robberies did not involve such extreme, personal violence against an elderly couple. It felt like an inside job disguised as a random act of street crime. Part 3. The Stagnant Years and a Sudden Spark. The autopsy report brought further heartache. The medical examiner revealed that while both victims had suffered blunt force trauma to their heads, the actual cause of death was suffocation. Hong's face had been wrapped in 25 feet of duct tape and Long's in 10 feet. The level of deliberate cruelty was staggering. Hoping for a breakthrough, investigators processed the crime scene for DNA and fingerprints. They questioned over 50 to 60 people, including neighbors, business associates, and family members. Chow Tran provided an airtight alibi, explaining that the entire family had been celebrating his father-in-law's birthday at a party the night before, staying together until past 10 o'clock in the evening. Shortly after the murders, Detective Stewart received a routine call from an insurance company. It turned out that Long and Hong had a substantial life insurance policy worth at least $1 million, and one of the primary beneficiaries was Chow Tran. When questioned, Chow explained that the policy was intended to ensure the commercial sewing business could survive if either of the founders pass away. Without any matching DNA profiles in the national database, and with all family members cooperating, the investigation slowly ground to a halt. For 2 long years, the case remained cold. The community tried to heal, but the memory of the sweet, hard-working couple hung over Arlington like an unresolved shadow. Then, in October of 2015, a bizarre turn of events breathed new life into the investigation. A 16-year-old youth named Willie Guillory had been arrested in Houston for stealing a horse, a felony in the state of Texas, because he was a minor at the time of the 2012 murders. His DNA had never been entered into the federal database. But once he turned 18 and was convicted of felony, his genetic profile was uploaded into the system. The system flagged a perfect match. The DNA on the partially smoked marijuana cigarette left at the Arlington crime scene belonged to Willie Guillory. On October 17, 2015, detectives brought Willie in for questioning. Confronted with the scientific evidence placing him inside the apartment, the young man broke down in tears and confessed. He revealed that he had not acted alone. He had been brought along by his 49-year-old uncle, Bobby Guillory, who told him they were going to Arlington to perform a job. According to Willie, they used a key provided to them to enter the apartment and stage the burglary, scattering the pills, the blue bandana, and the beer bottle to make it look like gang activity. When the elderly couple returned home, Bobby attacked them with a blunt object, and together they bound them with duct tape and hid them in the closet. When asked why they would commit such a heinous act against strangers, Willie revealed a shocking truth. It was a murder-for-hire plot orchestrated by a woman named Daphne Wright, the spiritual advisor from Houston. Part 4. The Mastermind and the Unraveling. On December 16, 2015, police arrested Bobby Guillory in Katy, Texas, on 2 counts of capital murder. Faced with the reality of his situation, Bobby also confessed. He claimed he had been laid off, desperate, and struggling to survive when Daphne Wright offered him $10,000 to carry out the hit. Bobby described Daphne as a spiritual loan shark. Over the years, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong Le, had run up an astronomical debt to her for her spiritual services, which had ballooned to between $250,000 and $280,000. When Daphne demanded payment, the family could not produce the cash. Knowing that the couple held massive life insurance policies, Daphne allegedly masterminded a plan to eliminate them so the family could collect the insurance money and pay off their spiritual debt. When Bobby was asked how Daphne had obtained the key to the apartment, he dropped a bombshell. He claimed she had received it directly from Chow Tran. Detectives immediately shifted their focus to Daphne Wright. When they searched her Houston home, they uncovered detailed financial ledgers showing that she routinely charged desperate clients $10, $20, $30, or $40,000 for blessings and curse removals. She was a woman who commanded absolute authority over her household and her clients, maintaining a cold, unshakable demeanor even under arrest. To secure a conviction against Daphne, the true mastermind behind the conspiracy, prosecutors made a difficult decision. They offered Chow Tran immunity from prosecution in exchange for his full, truthful testimony. Chow took the stand during Daphne's trial, which began on August 26, 2019. He painted a picture of a desperate family trapped under the psychological control of a woman they believed held supernatural power over their lives and deaths. He claimed they were terrified of what Daphne would do to them if they failed to pay. He even claimed that his mother-in-law, Hong, had suggested sacrificing herself so the family could collect the insurance money and escape. Daphne's grip, a claim that investigators viewed with deep skepticism. The defense argued fiercely that Chow was an untrustworthy accomplice who had orchestrated the crime to pocket the $850,000 of insurance money for himself, pointing out the complete lack of physical documentation regarding the alleged $280,000 debt. In September of 2019, the jury delivered its verdict. Daphne Wright was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to the ultimate punishment of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bobby and Willie Guillory likewise faced justice for their roles in the tragedy. Though the legal battle reached its conclusion, the emotional scars remained deep for Detective Stewart and the people of Arlington. The loss of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu served as a solemn reminder of the dangers of desperation and blind trust. Yet, through the painstaking work of the justice system, the truth was finally brought into the light, ensuring that the memory of a gentle, hard-working couple would not be forgotten, and that those who sought to exploit faith for greed would ultimately answer for their deeds. The early morning of June 10th, 2012, in Arlington, Texas, was quiet and heavy with the humid warmth of approaching summer. The streets were mostly empty, bathed in the soft, gray light of dawn. But at 7:29 in the morning, that silence was broken by a call to emergency dispatchers. On the other end of the line was 38-year-old Vietnamese immigrant Chow Tran. His voice, trembling with anxiety he could barely contain, came through the receiver. He was asking for a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, Long Nguyen and Hong Lee. The dispatcher, trying to gather the necessary details, asked for the names of the people in question. Chow, struggling through his panic, spelled the names out. His father-in-law's first name was L-O-N-G, and the last name was spelled W-N-G-Y-N. Chow explained that his father-in-law was 70-something years old at the time. As the dispatcher worked, Chow's panic flared. He explained that his son and his wife had gone to the apartment to look. They said they saw everything falling down inside, as if a storm had swept through the small home. The dispatcher assured Chow that officers were being sent immediately. Chow had sent his teenage son to knock on the door earlier, but there had been no answer. As the minutes ticked by, more family members began to gather outside the residence. Their worry grew with every passing second. They noticed that a window of the apartment was open, which was highly unusual. Things simply did not look right. Terrified of what they might find if they stepped inside, they stood in a small, anxious huddle, waiting for the police to arrive. Officer Weller was the first to arrive at the scene. He had been dispatched quickly, but when he pulled up, he knew this was not a typical welfare check. Usually, such calls did not come in so early in the morning, and it was rare to see an entire family standing outside an apartment, their faces pale with fear. Officer Weller entered the apartment alone, his hand instinctively resting near his holster. As he crossed the threshold, he was met with the telltale signs of a burglary. The living room was in complete disarray. CDs were scattered across the floor, furniture was overturned, and belongings were strewn everywhere. He called out, his voice echoing in the quiet apartment, but there was no answer. He cleared the living room, the kitchen, and the bathroom. Everything was empty. The only room left to check was the bedroom. He walked in, his eyes scanning the room. He did not notice anything out of the ordinary at first glance. He was not focused on the state of the room. His sole priority was finding the elderly couple and ensuring they were safe. Thinking they might have simply gone out for an early morning walk, he turned to leave. But as he swung his flashlight toward the door, the beam of light caught hand smudges on the wall next to a very small closet. Officer Weller hesitated. A deep, instinctual feeling told him not to open that door, but his duty pushed him forward. He reached out, grabbed a handle, and pulled the closet door open. Inside, he saw two people, It was the mother and the father he had been looking for. They were hog-tied with duct tape. Their heads and mouths were heavily wrapped in the gray adhesive. There was blood everywhere. In that split second, the officer knew they were dead. Even with 14 years of experience, it was the most gruesome, brutal scene he had ever witnessed. Shocked and unable to speak, Weller walked out of the bedroom and stood in the middle of the living room. He could not bring himself to use his radio immediately. When he finally found his voice, he requested a supervisor and a crime scene unit. Chapter 2, the investigation begins. When the Arlington homicide investigators arrived, the gravity of the crime cast a shadow over the entire team. Leading the team was a veteran detective who had spent 21 years in homicide. He had seen the worst of humanity, but this scene ranked among the absolute most horrific. It was clear that a violent struggle had taken place. There were bloodstains on the carpet, the couch, the table, and the walls. It appeared the couple had grabbed at the walls as they were being dragged toward the back bedroom, closet. Initial theories pointed toward a robbery gone wrong, given the ransacked state of the apartment. However, the sheer level of violence seemed far too extreme for a simple theft. The victims suffered blunt force trauma to their foreheads, with markings that suggested a tool like a hammer might have been used. The neighbors and community members were devastated. Long Nguyen and Hong Lee were known as a sweet, generous, and hard-working couple who never bothered anyone. They had no known enemies. The couple had immigrated to the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000, bringing their 3 children and their deeply held traditions to Texas. They settled in Arlington, a city in Tarrant County with a large and vibrant Vietnamese community, and built a commercial sewing business. To help run the business, they enlisted their son-in-law, Chow Tran, who spoke the best English and served as the face of the company. For nearly a decade, they thrived, even securing a lucrative contract to make garments for Disney. But by the year 2011, their luck had run out. They lost the Disney contract, and the business began a steep decline. Desperate to save their livelihood, the family turned to traditional beliefs. In Vietnamese culture, many believe in spiritual advisors who can help lift curses and bring good fortune during times of financial ruin or personal crisis. While searching through a local Vietnamese newspaper, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law found an advertisement for a spiritual advisor based in Houston, some 250 miles away. Her name was Daphne Wright, and she advertised that she could remove bad curses and bring prosperity. Chow contacted Daphne and drove to Houston for a consultation. She performed a ritual, and the family felt a sudden wave of hope. They believed their business would finally turn around. But a year later, the only thing that had visited the family was a terrible, unspeakable tragedy. Chapter 3: Clues and Red Herrings. As investigators meticulously processed the crime scene, they found several odd items in the living room. On the coffee table sat a plate of crushed prescription pills, alongside a marijuana cigarette. More striking, however, was a light blue bandana wrapped tightly around a beer bottle. To the detectives, this looked like a deliberate calling card. Arlington had active Vietnamese gangs known for extorting local businesses, and the color of the bandana matched their known identifiers. Yet, experienced detectives remained skeptical. The scene felt too perfect, almost staged. Most gang members did not commit such highly personalized, excessively violent murders without a clear demand beforehand. As the forensic teams collected hair fibers, DNA swabs, and fingerprinted the duct tape, investigators sat down with Chow Tran. Because he was a primary English speaker, he spoke for the family. Chow explained that the night before, the family had gathered to celebrate his father-in-law's birthday. The couple had a wonderful time and stayed until about 10:30 before receiving a ride home. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. When asked if the couple kept large amounts of cash at home, Chow admitted that while some traditional Vietnamese families did not trust American banks, his in-laws did not have much money. He explained that the sewing business had been struggling and that they believe it was cursed. On June 11th, 2012, the autopsies were performed. The results were chilling. While the victims had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, that was not the cause of death. Hong Lee's face had been wrapped in 25 feet of duct tape, and Long Wen's face had been wrapped in 10 feet of duct tape. They had suffocated to death. The realization of their suffering hardened the detectives' resolve. This was not a robbery. The primary intent of the killers was to ensure the couple did not survive. Then, a phone call changed the direction of the case. Detective Stewart received a call from an insurance company. Routinely, companies notify authorities when a substantial life insurance policy is active on homicide victims. In this case, the policy was worth $1 million. When the detective inquired about the beneficiaries, one name stood out clearly: Chow Tran. Chapter 4: The Trail Goes Cold. On June 13, 2012, detectives brought Chow in for further questioning regarding the business and the large insurance policy. Chow explained that because the commercial sewing business was in his in-laws' names, the family wanted to ensure they had the financial stability to carry on the business if either parent passed away. He was cooperative, calm, and provided a seamless timeline of his whereabouts. He explained that on the night of the murders, the family had gathered at his home, eaten dinner, and played cards until just after 10 o'clock. Every family member backed up this alibi. Investigators collected DNA and fingerprints from Chow and the other family members to compare against the evidence found in the apartment. While they successfully gathered a DNA profile from the marijuana cigarette found on the coffee table, it did not match Chow, any family member, or any profile in the national database known as CODIS. Detectives theorized the DNA might belong to a juvenile, as minors who have not committed prior felonies are not entered into the system. Without a match, the investigation stalled. Detectives interviewed over 50 to 60 people, including neighbors and business associates. But every lead led to a dead end. For over 2 years, the file sat on a desk, growing cold. Then, in the year 2015, the case suddenly roared back to life. Chapter 5: A Confession in the Night. In October 2000,